Part 3. Egyptian Deadzone. Alex decided he would sit up in the cockpit with Layla while the bird made its way to Old Cairo. It wasn't that Alex didn't want to be with his team, but there was much less room in this new bird than on their old carrier. He felt fortunate that it was faster, though. A week's worth of flight would turn into a few days if they weren't shot down or intercepted by Beruger, which, at this point, seemed likely. He thought back to the bounty hunters, soldiers, and mercenaries John Morrison had sent to stop the Crusaders. Alex couldn't be sure what Morrison's better would do, or who the men would send. "Don't think too hard back there. The steam is fogging up my windows," Layla said sarcastically. "Sorry," Alex replied as he stood from his chair and looked over Layla's shoulder. "So how special is this machine?" "The old man would have been impressed. That is, if he didn't already know about it. The controls are like the old model, but someone designed this to fly like a fighter rather than a crew carrier." "Makes sense, apart from the cargo hold. It eats fuel, and weight has a part to play in that. It's like a fighter on a budget." "Nothing about this Silver Angel says budget, babe." "One day you're going to have to show me how to fly it." "I'd have thought you would know more about flying than me. Your dad was a pilot, after all." "I was too young to reach the stick, or at least that's what he always said. I get the feeling that Mom didn't want a pilot for a son. Not that it mattered in the end. Besides, you know how much I hate riding in a bird. Maybe flying in one will be different." Layla smiled as she tapped a few buttons, causing her chair to spin towards him. "I think your mother would have been proud of the man you've become." Alex gave her a half smile. "Maybe, but I think freedom fighter was further down the list than pilot." "You think my parents thought I'd be a scavenger and a caravan runner before or after they crossed freedom fighter off their list?" Layla asked. Alex laughed at that, then bent over and kissed her on the lips. She raised her hands and placed them behind his neck. The two stayed like that for a time. Neither could remember the last time they'd shared a lengthy kiss. California, maybe. As they pulled away from each other, Layla rose from her seat and motioned to it. "Sit down. I'll show you a few tricks. It's on autopilot right now, so even you could fly it." Vale was snoring on the floor of the small hold while Gates and Vixer were working on their weapons. Vixer had her rifle apart and tried to clean it, even though the turbulence was making the smaller pieces bounce off her lap and onto the ground. Gates, on the other hand, was sharpening the tips of his arrows and making sure they were ready for use once more. His bow was already gleaming off the low light of the hold after its polish. All Gates needed to do now was string up a few more magnesium arrows to replace the ones he had lost at the raider camps. "So those are explosive?" Vixer asked, her eyes wide as she watched Gates string the raw material to the arrowhead. "I never use them if they were. It'd be too wasteful if I were to miss. Explosives are better when you can set traps or sabotage something that isn't moving." Vixer raised an eyebrow at him. "I saw how you dead-eyed almost 10 Marines in New Purgatory under pressure. I'm not sure you know how to miss." "Suppose I don't need explosive arrows then, do I?" Keeley shook her head. "So what are those then?" "Mag arrows. Bright flash is good for scaring away animals at night or blinding people. Most of the time that's drivers. Whether I hit them or not doesn't matter." "Useful," Vixer said. "And cheap. I found a truckload of magnesium outside a quarry in Vegas. Takes a bit of work to refine it, but free's free." Vixer nodded. She was glad Gates was still speaking to her. She felt like she had at least one friend amongst the crew. "So how pissed off are you?" Vixer finally decided to ask. She had to know whether he was putting on a show or if he had forgiven her. "I'm alive," Gates replied. "We wouldn't have found out those settlements were destroyed if I hadn't gone to the wastes. Better to have the truth. About everything." "I'm not so sure. I mean, talking to Alex helped. It made me understand him more, I think. But can he trust me? Can any of you trust me?" Gates laughed. "Well, it's not like you started off on easy footing being an ex-Marine. But it's like you said in the meeting. You just gotta prove you're worth a damn. I got faith in you." "At least someone does." "I don't think you leaving a huge group of soldiers back in Purgatory to protect the civilians there isn't going unnoticed. That, and getting rid of your old major, got even more soldiers. That buys some goodwill, especially since you put them under someone else's command. Not many leaders can do that. It feels wrong abandoning them. They trust me and I've left them behind." "You didn't abandon them. You left them to Janet. She seems like she could rival you blow for blow." Vixer let a smile come across her face. Well, of that I have no doubt. My men will listen to her, or she'll straighten them out until they do. I wouldn't have it any other way. After a few hours of training, Alex slumped over in the rear pilot's chair. He was exhausted by all the shit that had happened in the past 48 hours, and his eyes were finally forced shut. Layla was getting there too, but the trip was important to Alex, so she kept going. She reached into the bag at her feet and grabbed a water bottle. As she sipped it, she looked at the bright stars to the north. At this point, they were well past England, relatively. If the old 3D map on her dash was correct, they were somewhere over Algeria, but Layla knew she was still passing her home. She figured she would end up back there one day, but for now her fate was tied with New Purgatory, to Alex. In her mind, this was all normal, traveling the world and fighting battles. The years struggling to survive felt so long ago, and in retrospect, tame. This will make it easier for others to survive, so they never have to live the way I did. So parents don't have to sacrifice themselves to save their children, like mine, like Alex's. We're doing this to make the world better. Relaxing on the coast with Alex had been nice for a time, but there was only so long they could sit on a beach before they felt the need to go back to New Purgatory, back to the fight. They were shaped by the atrocities that surrounded them, by the battles they fought and hardships they endured. Resting had only given them time to think about who they lost and why continuing was so important. So here they were again, rushing off into another dead zone to fight another battle with no real end in sight. No way to see where this new fight might go, and a plan that was based on Jack Newsom's ramblings. Layla tried to take her mind off the whole situation. Doubt always found a way to creep in, and she couldn't afford that. In this world, doubt was death. It will work out. It always does. We'll find a way, and then we'll be back in New Purgatory before... The lock-on alarm blared over the console, making red lights flash around the cockpit, and snapped her attention back to her immediate surroundings. Alex? Get up! Layla yelled. He stirred groggily. What? 2 birds. Nothing unique on their profiles. Alex strained to look out at the birds, but it was too dark until the sky lit up with the fire of a missile. They could both see that the birds were painted all black, the same color Morrison had used at the end. Layla pulled the flight stick hard to the right. Alex expected the bird to turn slow and take the brunt of the incoming blast. Instead, the bird rolled hard, and the blast far overshot the Silver Angel. Holy shit, Layla said under her breath as she righted the bird's axis. It was clear the other Hellchopper pilots had seen the stunt. Layla watched as their signals moved to escape. The pilots must have known they were outmaneuvered, but Layla was already on them. Let's see what kind of weapons this lady has, Layla said to herself. She flipped up one of the switches and pressed down. The radar in front of her gleamed orange before locking around one of the Hellchopper's silhouettes and turning green. Layla pressed on the trigger, and the skies lit up with machine gun fire that slammed into the locked-on target. The Hellchopper and the Silver Angel's sights burned up and fell towards the continent below them. The other Hellchopper was hopelessly outmatched in speed. Layla fought to slow down and not overshoot it. Hold on, Alex said as Layla locked in the second Hellchopper with her targeting computer. He found the comm control and switched it to an open channel. Unless you want to follow your wingman screaming in a twisted hunk of metal, you'll tell us who you're with. The comm was quiet for a few moments, and then static crackled in. You already know the answer to that, American. German accent, just like Beruger's, Alex said with his finger off the comm's transmit button. He pressed it down again after a few moments. Yeah, I do. Have a nice night. Alex looked over at Layla. Do it. What? Alex, it's not even fair. They tried to ambush us. If you hadn't seen them, we'd be dead right now. Take them out. It's no less than they deserve. Alex replied harshly. Alex, they're helpless. If they hadn't intercepted our flight path, they'd have never caught up to us. Let's just leave them and move on, Layla pleaded. Do it or I will. Alex regretted those words in an instant. Regardless of whether he meant them or not, he had never been that aggressive towards Layla. The edge in his voice had caught her off guard. She stared at him as if he was a stranger. She didn't recognize this side of him, nor did she know it existed. This wasn't Alexander Velasco, the man she loved. This was someone else. Fine, Layla said, standing up from her chair and motioning towards the button that would launch a barrage of machine gun fire towards their enemy. Do it. Alex stared at her, but Layla just stared back. He was angry, but she was disgusted. She didn't want to look at him, but if he wanted to murder in cold blood, she would let him. She would not let his actions stain her soul. Alex leaned down for the flight stick and pulled the trigger nonchalantly, staring into Layla's eyes all the while. Once again, the bright lights of the machine gun fire lit up the sky and streamed off, slamming into their target. Alex stood up straight and made for the main hold. Layla watched him leave and slam the cockpit door behind him. For the first time since they had met, Alex had frightened her. Maeve Amaris sat on her throne and watched the melee below her. Several mercenaries who had made the mistake of attempting to kidnap some of her people on the outskirts of Old Cairo were being put to the test by a group of her best gladiators. Gajil, the old warrior of the group, stood front and center. The man carried a large wooden club that was painted by the blood of all his previous kills. To a distant eye, one might imagine it was colored a strange brown. The Maeve knew they would be wrong, for only blood left that color. She admired Gajil. He was undefeated in every fight and had been given the chance to become part of her honor guard, but every time she made the offer, the man refused. Instead, he continued to fight in the arena. Any time the Maeve had a new hotshot challenger, Gajil would ask to fight them. He only fought those that he could test his strength, those that no one else in the Maeve's army could best, and barring that, he was the executioner of Egypt's prisoners. Amaris watched Gajil as he stood alone with the would-be leader of the mercenary band. The executioner paced the leader in a circle, while the crowd of Egypt's commoners, crafters, and farmers looked on and roared at the engagement. The merc leader had a machete and padded black armor, but the Maeve could see the nervousness written across his face and in his eyes. Gajil, on the other hand, wore loose-fitting rags to cover his waist and legs, but nothing more. The sun was beating down hard, and while the merc leader was sweating and breathing, Gajil's inhalations were calm. The mercenary made the first attack. He rushed Gajil with a downward slash of the blade. Gajil sidestepped it and laughed aloud as he kicked the off-balance merc in the ass, sending him flying into the sand. The arena's crowd joined him in the laughter, but Gajil never lost focus. He hefted his club up as the merc got to his feet and struck downward. The merc turned as quick as he could and attempted to use his machete to shield the blow, but only succeeded in losing the blade as it stuck into the wooden club. Gajil took a few steps back and then dropped his club by his feet, and then brought up his fists. The merc did the same. They were on equal footing now, and the crowd roared louder than it had when the gladiators had weapons. Maeve Amaris let a smile come across her face. It would be a fair fight. The merc had lost the hesitation he wore across his face as he threw the first swing. It was a high hook that Gajil ducked and then followed by an uppercut to the man's chest. The merc dropped again, sucking in air that was littered with sand. Gajil took another few steps back, waiting for the mercenary to stand again, but he was interrupted by the sounds of horns coming from Maeve Amaris' section of the Colosseum. "That's enough, Gajil. If you taunt him any more, I will release the man out of pity." Gajil dropped his guard. The merc at his feet was still breathing hard and was making no attempt to stand. Gajil could hear the faint cries of "no more" and "help me." Instead, the gladiator focused his attention on the Maeve herself. He did not address her with his voice, but instead gave her a simple nod. Gajil walked back to his mace and once more hefted it above his shoulder. He moved back over to the mercenary and then lifted it high in the air. The crowd's roar was deafening now. With the mace high above Gajil, he thrust it down hard and crushed it into the mercenary's head. The roars began to die down seconds after. Gajil lessened his tight grip around the mace. It was dead weight in his hands. He looked down and watched as the old sand quenched its hemothirst. Gajil finally pulled up on the weapon and felt the drips of warm blood against his leg. He looked around and saw the other gladiators had already finished their work against the rest of the mercenaries. He then waved once to the crowd who had gathered to watch the blood sport. Maeve Amaris looked on at her champion as he appeased the crowd and smiled proudly. One day she would find a warrior that would be Gajil's equal, if only to make the future fights more interesting. The spectators cleared out as swiftly as the sun dropped beyond the horizon. The Maeve escaped to her chambers just behind her throne where her consort, Castor, awaited. "Was it as you hoped?" Castor asked as the Maeve went to sit on one of her lounging chairs. The lack of competition bores me. It's turned into nothing but executions or idiots killing each other with lucky glances. It was not this simple when I was a slave, the Maeve replied. Perhaps the ease of your reign has affected the battles that wage below us. Amaris didn't bristle at the comment, whereas her predecessor might have called for Castor's head. Instead, she poured herself a drink from the bottle on the table next to her. Oh? The Maeve asked, feigning ignorance. When you were a slave, there were slaves, those who fought for water and crumbs of food they would call meals. That environment breeds strong women like you and strong men like Gajil. The two of you were the best of your day, but your rule has changed that. The constrictions placed upon you and your gladiator counterpart have been removed, and forgive me for saying this, Maeve, but that has taken away the ferocity of those who battle now. Amaris smiled as she sipped her drink. She knew it was much too hot to drink liquor, yet she had the luxury of a cold or warm bath, fresh water, and a man if the mood suited her. Even if the moon rose above her, she would do as she willed, including toy with her consort. Do you propose I fight my counterpart, Castor? Castor now began to regret his position. No, but you have created a culture that does not breed strong warriors. Desperation made warriors in old Cairo. It made you, and I do not blame you for ending the slavery you endured. But our warriors have no reason to fight in the arena, no challenge, no obstacle. They need other warriors to fight, not drunks amongst the working class that sign up at the encouragement of their friends, or mercenaries that make the mistake of betraying the land's trust. This was why she adored Castor. What many leaders would consider insolence often turned into unadulterated and unfiltered feeling she could rely on from her most trusted counselor. Her only regret was that he had to be cornered and forced into such brilliance. So then what do we do about that? Amaris asked. You seem to already have an answer in mind, and I already knew what the problem was. Fix it for me. The arena would make an excellent place to train our warriors to be better fighters. If the people want blood sport, they can have it at the cost of outsiders. But our people will compete to make each other better, but not for the kill. All we need is someone to train them in both battle and restraint. You know, I had considered that, Amaris said sarcastically. But Gajil has denied every position I've offered him. Who else would train our army that I could possibly trust? She could tell that Castor was growing tired of the games. Amaris tried to be a fair ruler, but what she lacked in tyranny, she made up for by being condescendingly manipulative. Perhaps their leader should be the one to train them, since she is so dead set on being the people's hero. Though it has been so long since the people last saw their hero in combat. Castor shot back, leaving his formerly respectful tone behind. Amaris could have had him lashed to a post to rot in the sun, and she knew Castor had seen that carried out by the previous Maves. But Amaris laughed her quiet, denigrating laugh, the kind she only used when amused. She had much appreciation for her consort's opinions, and deeper down knew she needed to trust them. For Castor was a member of the people, and that was a title the Maeve could never attain. I wish there were more like you, Castor. Those unafraid to say what they mean at risk of death. This is why you are my consort. Your advice is always invaluable to me. Amaris stood from her chair and set the half-full glass of her drink down on the table. Her golden dress of polished metal shone in the moonlight. You are right, of course. I have created an environment that breeds poor warriors, but I have also failed in my true goal. I gave people their freedom, let them think for themselves, and only the man standing before me has made use of it. My work is undone by my predecessors because fear is still rampant in the people's hearts. The Maeve let out a long sigh. I am worth less as a leader than I was as a slave, yet the people follow me, their stupid ruler, because I was... Oh, what was that name they called me, Castor? Amaris never really forgot, but she was always disgusted to hear the name her adoring fans and now subjects chose to call her. The Maiden of the Sun, Castor replied as he watched the Maeve cringe. The maiden of beheaded idiots and sunburnt skin was better, Amaris said dejectedly. I want nothing more than for our people to feel as free as you do, Castor. Yet they see themselves as followers. They don't believe they can be any more than peasants or warriors. I am at a loss. If I fight, they wish to be like me. If I don't fight, they wish to earn my favor. If I ask them what they believe, they parrot what I say because they don't want the Maiden of the Sun to cut them down in the daylight. Amaris brought a hand up to her head and rubbed her temples. It was worries like this that kept her up at night, and she knew Castor was watching closely. For as much as he fought against her with words, the Maeve knew he admired her and wanted her. She knew that he saw her hurt because of the direction of her people. The Maeve knew Castor's direction was different, however. He saw an Egypt where the people couldn't be changed, where they would always be warriors. The Great War had brought tribalism, and eventually one leader came to the head of that great tribe here in northern Africa. All the anger and hatred of nearly dying out from other countries' wars was siphoned into blood sport. Taking control of that rage, it rebuilt Old Cairo, made the place a functioning city with food, clean water, and an army. But Amaris wanted more than that. She wanted civilization like she had been used to in the old world, not barbarism. Direction is not always as easy as perceiving it, Maeve. The people need education, but they must want it as much as they do blood. Some old world societies were never able to make that change, Castor finally said. Amaris knew that old world too well. She had been in her 20s before the war, a fan of history, and a soldier in the United States Marine Corps stationed in Egypt before the Great War. She survived the bombings and was taken by the tribes because her skin was too light for the northern African wastes. She found it to be one of history's cruel twists. One of my old sergeants would have punched you in the mouth and spat his drink in your eye, Amaris replied. He sounds charming. More than you are, you miserable jerk. Amaris spat back, breaking her regal tone. Go on home. I want to be alone now. I need to think about how I'm going to make our country right. Castor gave her a mocking bow as he left. Once he was gone, the Maeve threw her glass at the doorway, smashing shards against the door. She was never sure of her own leadership, but she was certain that she would not allow her people, her new people, to continue down a path that would lead to their end. You want me to set her down outside the city? Layla asked. Alex was standing behind her with his arms crossed as he looked out towards the desert that stretched until it reached the city. No, I don't want anyone to have to stay behind and watch the bird. Besides, out in this heat, the angel will turn into an oven, Alex replied. Set it outside that circular building. Shade should cover it all day. Yes, boss, Layla replied. Alex shook his head and walked back to the hold. He'd deal with the new wound between him and Layla after it had scabbed. You all ready? Alex asked as he grabbed the stabilizing bar above him. Hell yeah, Tyree said. You even know what we're looking for? Apart from an army? Alex replied. Not really. The ramp of the hell chopper went down, and instead of blinding sun, they were met by a blockade of bodies, muscular and coated in rags. Well, shit, there's your army, Alex, Gates said. You'll come with us, or you die, the lead man of the group in rags said. Alex was about to move forward, but Vixer was already ahead of him. She raised her rifle and aimed it at the talker. Maybe you want to rephrase that, asshole. No, you'll come now. Vixer fired off a round that caught the man in the chest. The group he had come with stepped back as the body fell. There's a lot more where that came from, kids, Vixer called out. Her reply was the sound of the massive group that surrounded the hell chopper, lifting their own variety of weapons and loading them. Oh, for fuck's sake, Vixer said as she lowered her rifle. Layla walked up behind the group and shook her head. So much for the new bird. Alex wasn't sure where he had been taken. The people that had captured him and his team had placed sacks over their heads and only took them off when they arrived in this dark place surrounded by adobe walls. Gates and Vale were with him, but not Layla or Vixer. You two all right? Alex asked as he noticed that none of them were chained or bound. That made him curious. Doing fine for the most part, Vale replied. Gates was shaking his head. I'm gonna fucking gut whoever took my bow. Wonder why they didn't just kill us, Alex said aloud. Every tribe is different. Some like to put their executions on big display. Others just let prisoners starve to death and use their bones for tools, Gates explained. What about the ladies? Vale asked. Tribes. I've seen. Well, they find other uses for women, Gates continued. Enough, Alex said as he looked for any weak points in the cell's wall. Help me find a goddamn way out of here so we don't have to have that shit on our heads. Layla woke up next to Vixer on a large pile of sand and inside a cell. When she reached and touched the back of her head, she felt a lump. Great, Vixer got us both knocked out. Keely, come on, Keely, wake up, Layla said as she pushed on the captain's arm. Vixer stirred from unconsciousness. Who the hell do I have to kill? She said groggily. I'm not sure we'll be killing anyone for a while. It looks like we've been jailed, Layla replied. Vixer made the attempt to push herself up, but got halfway to her feet before her arms and legs failed her. Take it easy. They must have beaten up you more than me, Layla said, now noticing the bruising on Keely's arms. Can you still move your legs? Yeah, Vixer replied. Barely, but they're pretty sore. But I know they're still there. That's a relief. Layla let out a sigh. The last thing they needed was someone being maimed at their first stop. It wasn't long before they had a visitor, one of the Egyptians sent to collect them when they had first arrived. Where the hell did you take the men? Layla yelled out. The man just stood there and watched from outside the cage's bars. Layla thought she could hear him smelling her from outside. Then another man appeared beside him. This one was tall and dressed in an ornate robe with a blue sash tied around it. Layla felt fear pounding in her chest. I spent 20-something years avoiding this in New Purgatory. It isn't going to happen here. Layla stood upright against the pain she felt in the back of her head and held up her fists. I'm ready. Are you? She called out. Oh, I am. This should be interesting, the ornate man called out. He reached out and pressed a button behind the wall to Layla and Vixer's cell. Instead of the bars opening, there was a blinding let-in of light from behind her. Layla, what the hell is going on? Vixer asked as she tried to cover her face from the bright morning light. I don't know. Just stay here and stay down. Oh, hilarious, you bitch, Vixer said as she coughed through a laugh. Layla stood and walked towards a new exit, looking at the circular surroundings she now found herself in. Alex saw Layla walk out of the same kind of wall he, Gates, and Vale had. When he looked up, he saw a massive group of people in the stands. They were yelling, cheering, booing. It's a stadium, just like Yankee. Just makes you wonder what the hell they do here for entertainment. Alex couldn't smell fuel, and it appeared that no one in the stands had high-powered rifles. Still, he felt on edge, and not because he had just walked out of a prison cell. There were too many sets of eyes on him. His attention was pulled from the crowd when he saw 2 more walls open across from his location. More people filed out, but Alex didn't recognize them. He was certain that they weren't Egyptian. Their skin tone and equipment didn't match the tribals who had taken his team. It is a rarity that we receive 2 groups of trespassers in the same day. Here in Old Cairo, we have no tolerance for strangers who wish to pollute our lands, but we do allow them to fight for their freedom. Your allies remain such, but neither side shall return to their cages until only one group remains. Alex found that the voice was coming from a woman sitting on a throne made from skeletons. It looked like nonsense out of an old world comic book, but it was real. Femurs and foot bones made up the bottom, while rib cages and spines completed the back, and arm bones and hands made the armrests. These items are yours, but your firearms are not allowed in my arena, the woman shouted out. Members of the crowd closest to the fighters tossed down familiar items, Mikhail's knife and Gates's bow, but without arrows. From afar, Alex could see that the opposition each had a survival knife, but there were 5 of them to Alex's 4. Gates strode up from behind him and asked, You mind if I even this up a bit? The survivor reached for Alex's blade. As long as you don't do something stupid like shoot it from your bow, Alex replied as he passed it to Gates. Now that would just be a waste. Gates lobbed the blade in his hand a few times, then flung it hard across the arena and towards the closest opponent, catching the man in the chest. The rest of the group came running for Alex's team. With no other options, Alex lifted his fists at the first merc that came at him. The merc struck low, which gave Alex a chance to jump back and drop an elbow down on his opponent's arm, with all the force in his body. The merc dropped the blade, and Alex threw a knee into the man's jaw, forcing him to the ground. Gates dealt with each stab from the merc coming after him by smacking the man's hand with his bow from afar. The mercenary was growing infuriated, so he tossed the blade aside. Gates let out a laugh as he dropped his own bow and tackled the grunt to the ground, hammering fists into the man's face. Vale could be heard from another part of the arena yelling, "Come on, motherfucker!" as he brought up his hands. The merc circling with him was hesitant, but Tyrese kept taunting him. "You gonna use that knife, huh?" Vale moved in close and landed a few body punches. He saw that the merc was trying to swat him away with the knife. Vale came in close again and feinted a throw at the man's chest, then used his other hand to grab the merc's wrist and wrest the blade from his hand. With the blade pulled loose, the fear in his opponent's eyes made them grow wide. Vale didn't give the man a chance to react, and forced the blade into the man's sternum, twisting it, and it forced its way through the merc's flesh an inch at a time. From another part of the arena, Layla was throwing hard kicks at her merc's legs that pissed her combatant off. He kept trying to stab her legs, but Layla moved too fast for him. Now he was trying to move in on her, believing the leg kicks would not affect him. Layla kept moving back and finally landed a hard kick that made the merc's leg buckle from under him. He was caught by surprise while he was on the ground, but found himself unable to get back to his feet. Layla lifted her leg once more and brought her booted foot down on the man's throat. Alex, back in the center of the arena, looked around. His man was down but not dead. Gates's man was wishing he was dead if he wasn't already, and Layla and Vale were standing over their own respective corpses. Alex moved over to the body of the man Gates had killed with Mikhail's knife. Alex ripped it from the body, causing blood to splurt out against his fatigues and boots. All the while he had failed to realize that the crowd around them was cheering. Entertainment for the masses, murder for a crowd. Must be how they keep up morale around here. Alex's team began moving back to their cells when the woman's voice yelled out again and stopped them. "You left one alive. That is not acceptable." The whole team stopped and turned to look at Alex. He shrugged and turned back towards the man in the center of the arena and made for him, reaching for his blade. Layla snagged his arm. "Not again, Alex. Please." Alex shook himself loose from her grip. "I'll do what keeps us alive," he replied, walking towards the mercenary. He kneeled and pushed the blade into the man's neck, and then stood back up. "It's not like you had a problem killing yours." As the two groups made their way back to the cells, Layla shook her head. All she could feel was disappointment, and even disgust. Maeve Amaris watched the leader slowly sink his blade into the neck of the German soldier with no remorse. He didn't try to beg for the life of a man he didn't know, and he didn't hesitate. The man simply killed him. That struck the Maeve that there was something off about this group. They were clearly American, that much she was sure of. What she was not sure of was how this group had found this place. Their dog tags that flew in the wind were what concerned her. Amaris couldn't believe any ex-military existed in the United States, short of Morrison's Marines, but she hadn't heard any news of that place for at least a year. "That was quite the battle," Castor said as he moved to her side. "A true fight. I would make them fight again were I not so curious about their motives for coming here. Bring up the man with the knife and give his wounded aid." "What about the others?" Castor asked. "Put them in the room across from Gagil. Perhaps some luxury will convince them we aren't so bad. I must know who they are." After an hour, Castor brought up the leader. He had failed to strip the man of his knife, but that mattered little to the Maeve. She eyed up the man's dusty, bloody fatigues and shirt. Though his willingness to follow her orders and execute a man in cold blood spoke volumes, the Maeve still wondered what kind of man he was. "Any reason you brought me up here?" the leader asked from the doorway. Castor had walked in and stood by Amaris, who was sitting in a decorative chair, positioned in front of her grand bed. "Come in," the Maeve said. "Perhaps you would like a drink to soothe your throat of our desert winds." Alex shrugged at her. "I'd murder for one." "You already have," Amaris replied. "Castor, if you please." Her consort walked over to her long table and poured 2 glasses with an unmarked bottle. The Maeve followed Alex's eyes. They never left Castor. That was the sign of one worried about poison. Her consort moved over to Alex and placed 1 glass in his hands, then handed the other to her. "Your accent doesn't fit your location, miss." "Maeve," Castor interrupted. "Oh, for the love of God, Castor," the Maeve exclaimed, once again breaking her forced regal tone. Do I only address you as consort? Go take a walk. Castor did as she asked. Alex walked deeper into the Maeve's chambers as her consort exited. Just call me Amaris. I hate the titles these people have tried to give me. They can be embarrassing, especially when they use them around people from civilization. Why play this role at all, then? Alex asked as he examined the clay sculptures the Maeve had generously decorated her royal room with. You're either American or you were educated there. This harem isn't worth a little embarrassment, then why stay? Well, Amaris started. For once I meet someone with intelligence to match their wit and prowess in battle. You ask why, but all I can tell you is that the rest of the world has fallen apart. Old Cairo seemed a good place to restart. Alex took a sip from his drink and turned back to face her. Her skin was slightly lighter than Vale's, her dark hair shaved down to her scalp, much like Alex's own, and her clothing consisted of glimmering gold armor with white cloth frills at the shoulder and waist. The world isn't as broken as it might seem. We've pressed on, as have the problems, Alex explained. Then I pose a question to you. Why come here? How did you know about us? We clearly weren't on anyone's radar before. We deal with lost mercenaries, slavers, and anyone else who seeks to cause us harm. We make sure they can never report back to whoever their leaders are. You mean they end up in your arena regardless of their intentions so they can be a part of your blood sport? Alex corrected. Judging by your companion's hostility towards my army, I'd say your intentions were somewhat clear, the Maeve fired back. That's the response I give when someone walks on my bird and wants to take me prisoner. No hard feelings, but that guy had it coming. Amaris nodded and smiled. Then you know little of our people. You, like so many other mercenaries, met orders with violence. Though I'm not sure I can blame those who only know of violence. It often trumps intelligence. Let's pretend we're not assuming we already know everything about each other, Alex replied before he drained the rest of his glass, and then dropped it to the floor. Very well. Why are you here? A man. One specific man who knew what you were doing out here and what you'd built. Captain Jack Newsom. Bullshit. Alex reached behind his back and pulled the old man's journal from his back pocket. He moved it in front of himself slowly and held it up in front of his chest. Not quite. The old man and I go back a bit. You want to know more, then ask Tyrese. If not for Jack, I wouldn't be alive, and I wouldn't be here to ask for your help. Alex tossed the journal over to the Maeve, who caught it and began flipping through a few pages. She recognized Newsom's handwriting, the scrawling in the margins, and sideways written notes that corrected his old assumptions. The Maeve ignored Alex and read a few passages while he helped himself to a seat on her floor. Why do you need my help? Amaris asked aloud, not looking at him. When you finish reading his journal, you'll understand. But the long and short of it is, I need to protect my home. I can't do that without some semblance of an army. All I have are refugees and ex-soldiers, but they're not enough. New Purgatory. Jack explained what happened to me. We talked on several occasions, Amaris said as she flipped page after page. He wanted my help in the first place, but ran out of time. An all too familiar story for the old man. He didn't have the means either, but I imagine that you do. We can't be the only hell chopper that's landed here. Whatever you have that could bring soldiers to New Purgatory could help us. Amaris closed the book with one hand and looked up at Alex. Why is it you're here telling me this and not my old sergeant? I think you know why, Amaris. Would you be so eager to read a living man's journal? He died trying to save my team and making sure we could achieve our goals. Goals we shared. Shit, Amaris said, tossing the journal back to Alex. I do have an army, but why should I be so willing to help New Purgatory? I've lived here for so long that I have no ties there anymore. And with Jack Newsom dead, there's the old man's memory, and the chance to join the council in Jerusalem. You'd be a sovereign country. You'd have a vote, and you could avoid the war that'll be coming to you from the way you treat prisoners. You must have had escapes. Amaris nodded at that a few times, then sipped from her drink. She felt conflicted, especially by this man who had only just arrived. Yet she saw a fire in his eyes that she had not seen since being trained under Captain Newsom. Very well, Mr. Alexander Velasco. Alexander, of course. Of course I will aid you. But I need you to do something more for me, beyond councils, votes, and war. And what's that? Alex asked, crossing his arms. My arena needs new challengers. My people take blood sport, as you so eloquently put it, seriously. In the sands, it's our entertainment, but it also serves to strengthen the skills of our warriors. I've recently been reminded that my style of leadership does little to foster hardened people. You mean slavery and oppression? Yeah, it only works for so long before you're killed by the animals you create. My people are not slaves. I freed them from that oppression when I fought in the arena. They're farmers, builders, and some choose to fight. No one is forced. But our heritage is what it is. The arena has existed since old Cairo was nothing more than wandering tribes. It is who we are. Alex opened his mouth to reply, but Amaris held up a hand. Before you say it, yes, I know I could stop the cycle any time I wanted. But I won't. There would be far more blood than any battle in the arenas. Your blood, however, will fuel a revolution for my people. Except that they're all death matches. What happens if I lose? Alex asked. Isn't it obvious? You die, and each one of your team will die until they accomplish what it is I want. And if I want nothing to do with this? Amaris smiled. With what you're after, you have no choice. But you and your team can leave if you feel my offer is not satisfactory. But you won't leave. I saw your face when I commanded you to execute that man. You have no mixed feelings. You did it because you had to. You're a man who understands the stakes he is dealing with. Much like an old man we both once knew. Alex hadn't thought twice about the cold-blooded murder he had committed. Where Layla had tried to convince him not to kill the man, Amaris applauded it. Both of those reactions made him sick at the pit of his stomach. I do what I must. My mission is important. Whoever those mercenaries were, they likely got what they deserved. They were German. We've been getting more of them. Regarding your point, I believe you're right. Eventually someone will come for us, either to have us rejoin the world as you seek to, or otherwise, though I believe them to be a part of a mercenary company. You'd be wrong, Amaris. If you talk to Jack, then you know other nations survived the war, not all of them peaceful. If Berlin has found you, and you killed their people, they'll send more soldiers until you follow them, or they've wiped you out. Berlin? Newsom never mentioned them to me. He was more concerned about John Morrison. Now that one tyrant is dead, you're contending with another? Yes. This one wants to make New Purgatory a puppet state, but we don't have an army large enough to repel an attack. Hell, we're still just trying to get the power back on. Berlin has had years to fix whatever problems they might have had. If they attack us, everything the refugees fought for will be gone. And if we're gone, they'll go after anyone else that opposes their vision of the future. I understand the stakes, Alexander, but I can't join your battle. Not without a way to rally my people. They are bound by an old way of thinking. They have no encouragement to be more than warriors or farmers. You and I come from a place where freedom was instilled at birth. If my people see that, if they see another outsider rise in my arena, they'll know that not all warriors are simple barbarians. They will force themselves to learn, if only to match your skill. Alex let out a long sigh. If that's what it takes, I'll do it. But for your sake, I hope you're right. The last thing I want to do is have your people jump down from the stands in revenge. They won't. They respect my rule. I've bested them all so that they would listen to me. If you defeat the best of us, then perhaps they will listen to you. Then let me know when you want me to fight again, Alex said. With that, he left the Maeve's chambers and followed her guards to his new room. Layla was helping Vixer lift a glass of water up to her face while she laid on a bed. Compared to the cell they had just been in hours before, this place was a hotel. There was a knock at the door. I got it, Bale said, moving towards the entrance and opening it. He had to look at the young woman standing there, then back at Layla, and then the woman in the doorway again. Their features were similar, though her face was slightly more rounded, where Layla's was narrow, and her blonde hair was cut short and combed forward, and the sides were shaved close to her scalp. Her eyes were glowing amber. Are you going to keep staring at me, or let me in to examine your friend? The woman said. Bale stepped to the side, and the woman walked in towards Vixer. External bruising, lack of movement. Can you feel your limbs? I can feel the pain they're in, Vixer spat. The medic reached into her bag for a needle and injected it into both of Vixer's arms. Keely took a deep breath and coughed hard. Holy shit! What happened to the pain? She asked as she sat up. Try to take it easy. That was a cocktail of painkiller. I'd recommend a meal or you'll become lightheaded. I'm not paid to clean the floors. The woman stood up and was about to make for the exit when she was stopped by Alex in the doorway. He seemed confused until he saw Layla over the medic's shoulder. Who the hell are you? He asked. Shaylee Ferris. The Maeve asked me to check in on your injured companion. And your name? Alexander Velasco. How's Keely doing? Your girl will be fine, but keep an eye on her and call a guard if you need me for anything more, the medic replied. Right, Alex replied, letting her pass. She smiled up at him, and he returned it with a puzzled look. After she left, he came inside. How are you feeling, Captain? Ugh, don't call me that unless you're going to bring me a steak. A real one, not that soy ration bullshit. Keely answered. Alex shook his head. Meat probably isn't off the menu here. Alex looked towards the open door. Can we get some goddamn food? He yelled. The sound of footsteps rushing down the hall was the only affirmation he needed. So what did the Queen want? Layla asked, eyeing Alex. The old man didn't let us down. They knew each other. We're free to go if we want. But, Gates asked, the long and short of it is if we want her help, then we have to continue to fight in her arena, Alex said. What'd you tell her? Vale asked. That I plan on fighting. Why did I expect anything else? Layla said under her breath. Alex tilted his head as he looked at her, but Layla didn't look away. She stared right back at him. You have a problem with that? Alex asked. I have a problem with how easy murder has become for you. Not fighting Marines because they threaten us, not killing aggressors, committing cold-blooded murder against those you don't even know. I'm doing this to protect our city. If this Maeve wants me to kill her warriors in exchange for her help, then that's what I'm gonna do. Layla shook her head. Yeah, until you can't tell the difference between the innocent and the guilty. Then what have you become? I asked the Maeve. They were German. They've been getting a lot of them out here, probably scouting. Beruger must know about Old Cairo. Also, I didn't see you holding back in that arena. That soldier threatened my life in that moment. You executed a man you'd incapacitated in the center of that arena because you were told to. You never let anyone dictate murder to you before. Gates sat back and crossed his arms, while Keely perked her head up from the bed. They were all paying attention now. Vale leaned forward in his seat. She's right. That doesn't sound like you. Stay out of this, Vale, Alex replied. You don't know fuck all about me or what I'll do to keep New Purgatory safe, even if that means everyone in this room disagreeing with me. I know what Janet told me, Vale shot back. I know you don't murder for fun or pleasure. Otherwise, you'd have been one of Morrison's Marines. Alex shook his head and pulled up a chair. He sat on it backwards and rested his arms on the back. This is happening whether you want it to or not. I'm going to fight in that arena, and if none of you will join me, I'll do it myself. The fact is we need Old Cairo, and this is the only way to get their support. Gates raised his hand. Hey, I'm in too. Wouldn't mind fighting in that arena again. Vixer struggled to raise her own hand. It got halfway up and no further. I can move and do more than just fire a gun. I'm in too. Layla put a hand up to her forehead. I'll be in the stands, trying not to accept what you're becoming. Alex shifted his gaze over to Vale. Sorry, Alex. I know it's important to you, but there's always another way. You know that better than anyone else in this room. Alex shrugged at him. It's good to have your own way of thinking. That's what keeps us from becoming John Morrison. But that doesn't change the Maeve's demands. If you won't join me, I won't hold a grudge. Just don't judge me for what I need to do. That seemed to ease the tension in the room he had created. Alex didn't want that hostility, but he knew it was bound to come, especially since the old man was no longer around to take the heat. Leadership meant making hard choices. That responsibility fell on his shoulders now. One of the guards came walking into the room, breaking the silent void left by their conversation. He had a platter of meat, bread, and cheese and set it on the table near Vixer's bed. Alex decided he would pass on the food for now and went for a walk. The team swarmed the platter. Amaris was smiling to herself in her marble bath, pleased with how the day's events had proceeded. Not only was she filled in about current events, but she would also have new blood for her arena and a purpose for her army. One that would breed either contempt or the need to find another way to train, fight, and survive. She knew war was hell, but war in this age, with its lack of medicine, doctors, and direction, was a rampant inferno. If those that were considered the best of her soldiers took losses in the arena, it would encourage her people to find another way to live beyond war. That was how societies based on war grew. The promise that there were other paths than chopping heads or getting your own head chopped off was a powerful motivator. Vale coughed in the Maeve's doorway. He didn't dare walk in any further, and Damaris could hear his foot tapping outside of her bathroom. She wondered if the man could hear the water of her bath sloshing about. Don't be so modest. I'm not the type to kill you if you see me naked. Tyrese moved inside the room and towards the bath. She could see he was struggling to keep eye contact with her, so she sank her features below the bubbly water. You must be Tyrus. Tyrese, Vale corrected. Your guards say you wanted to speak with me. Indeed. Alex says you tell quite the story about him and what happened in New Purgatory. It's a part of history now. History should be recorded. Sum it up for me. I'll ask questions to fill in the gaps, the Maeve announced. A bunch of kids who grew up on the street fought the leader of New Purgatory and won. They started with nothing, ended up with weapons, experience, and a team of the deadliest people on the planet. They called themselves the Crusaders, but the people under Morrison's thumb had a different name for them, Vale explained. Oh, what did they call them? Depends on who you ask. They were terrorists to some, but heroes to others. And how did they form? The way any revolution does. Necessity. When you get kicked in the head long enough, you either die or fight back. Alex, Layla, and too many others to name did just that. They scavenged weapons they barely knew how to handle and ambushed troop movements and convoys. They never took losses. That got him noticed by John Morrison himself, and a man you're familiar with, Captain Jack Newsom, Vale explained. A long time ago, Newsom was my sergeant. He was never easily impressed. You always had to go beyond expectation with him. Ask the most questions, perform when all other options were closed off. And somehow, when every chip was down and there were no routes of escape, you still had to succeed. Well, you know him better than I do, Vale replied as he leaned back on the wall. Well, I never had a chance to meet him. I'm told he had a way of motivating you when you couldn't do those things you mentioned. If he couldn't push you with words or speeches, he would manipulate you into completing your task. Crusaders found that out quickly. When he found them, he offered them a way to achieve their goal with a plan he had attempted and failed 10 years prior. It involved finding members of his old team and rumors he had dredged up from the pre-war. Apparently you were part of that plan, as Alex no doubt told you. Yes, but he ran out of time. Less time than the rest of the Crusaders, it seems, the Maeve added. So somewhere between the rest of the world and New Purgatory, he dies? Nah. He was captured first. The old man gives himself up to save the team and a lover in Jerusalem. No one knew it until after they came home. But some believe Newsom had this plan in mind from the start. This was just his best opportunity. Why would he do that? The answer to that is more theory than fact. From what I've been told, Jack Newsom was a hard man, not easy to get along with, and used to always being right or having the final say. But Alex and his friend Elias questioned him nearly at every turn. Had it been your old world military, they might have been thrown out for it. They saw through the veneer the old man put up, pressed him on his past as they actively met members that were a part of it. Eventually, Jack had to own up to his mistakes, not just to Alex, but the entire team and his friends he had nearly gotten killed or forced into exile. I like to think that in that time, Jack realized how he had failed his old team 10 years ago. Everyone else had paid a price except him. And this time he was determined to see the mission through regardless of the cost. Not to Alex, the new team, or his companions, but to himself. He owed them all that much, but again, that's just a guess. What we do know is after his capture he returned to New Purgatory and tortured for information. Information Jack gave him, but it was his last gift, a misdirection. He made Morrison send his soldiers across the city to protect a specific asset, while the Crusaders ruptured supply lines and transportation. With Morrison's army scattered, they attacked him in his tower. There were losses, but in the end they killed the man, blew his tower, and escaped. The Maeve nodded at Tyrese, but she still had more questions. Was Newsom's body ever found? Yeah, we found it a bit after we began rummaging through the old ruins. At least we believe it was his body. It was away from the main ruins and was missing teeth. It was also riddled with bullets. Morrison killed him after he had what he wanted. So the old man never got to see the future he was fighting for, the Maeve said morosely. Not him nor his old team. Jack Newsom lived his life like he was on borrowed time, but something about him had changed when he met Alex and his team. Like he knew he wouldn't or couldn't fail again. That peace may have made him feel comfortable enough to finally let go. He was a troubled man who spent much of his life fighting against the old world's ills. It doesn't surprise me that he was trying to correct them, even after the war. Thank you, Tyrese. I appreciate you enlightening me about his fate. When Tyrese did not push off her wall to leave, the Maeve tilted her head at him. Was there something else? Maybe you could enlighten me about something. Of course. Why make Alex fight for your people? You have a lot to gain by helping us. You could join the council, receive aid from the other countries, open yourselves to trade and all that comes with that. The Maeve smiled. You think he didn't mention that? It seems you don't share the same faith Captain Newsom had in Alex. But to answer your question, it is because he's unique. A man that isn't afraid to get his hands dirty for a cause. You must realize that being a pure hero is nonsense. To beat men like Morrison, he no doubt had to make questionable moral choices, and if he didn't, the old man did it for him. But the past is unimportant. I want him to fight because he reminds me of Jack. I might have my own motivations in mind for what his fighting will do for my people, but I also want to test him. I want to know if he's worth following, to see how much he truly emulates the old man. You'll have your test, Damaris, but I hope your assessment's wrong. And why is that, Tyrese? Because everyone close to him would rather die than see that happen. Thomas Beruger was looking through a microscope in his lab and running numbers through his brain. This was his escape from the mundane matters of the world. Politics bored him. He let Eberhard be the figure of Berlin. To give rousing speeches and attend dinners, Beruger would rather spend alone working on his research. It was why he found it to be such a shame that politics wouldn't leave him or his mind alone. He had hoped John Morrison would handle his problem, but now Franklin's son was dead, and Beruger had to take back what John's father had struggled to build. A legacy shattered in one long night of fighting, and too many bodies to count. Beruger mused what the world might look like now if Franklin Morrison had lived and was able to better guide his son. Martial law would not have been my first choice. It was only a matter of time, then, before the younger Morrison made enemies, if not among his own people, then of those in other countries. Power had its limits in the world government's new oligarchy, an issue Beruger had to deal with now. Losing votes and confidence is bad for us all. It could start another damned great war. Much of the world was still irradiated, large chunks of dead space where no one could live and nothing could grow. If the world were to begin fighting again, it would ruin any chance of fixing the damage. The splinter group, these Crusaders, threatened the peace that Franklin Morrison and Thomas Beruger had engineered. The scientist was unsure of what he hated most, the fact that his own work was being torn apart by those with lesser minds than he, or the audacity, the hubris of the Crusaders believing they could make the world better than he, the man that had saved it. It was sickening that he was reminded every day that a Cloudbreaker nation had fallen to barbarism. All that potential, the technology, lost in a haze of bloodlust. He rolled his wheelchair over to one of his computer consoles and punched in a few commands. But like so many others, you are too predictable, he said to himself. Beruger's plan would require sacrifice of his soldiers and sacrifice of alliance. But in the end, he would win the long game of chess against these would-be revolutionaries. Their bodies will hang from the remains of Morrison's tower as a reminder that this new world will not tolerate those that wish to desecrate the work we've done to rebuild it. Beruger smiled to himself as he looked at the console. He would beat the Crusaders at a game they were unfamiliar with, the game where he was king. Once again, Alex found himself in the center of Maeve Amaris's arena. She had given him a few days for Vixer to recover and to pique the crowd's interest in the newcomers. He looked back at Gates and Vixer. They each gave him a single nod. Alex gave an unceremonious thumbs up to the Maeve, and she let in their challengers. They were tattooed men who wore only rags for pants and were armed with spears. They did not rush, but walked towards the center of the arena, eyeing up each potential target. Alex flipped his knife, letting the blade point towards his wrist, and squared up with the man in front of him. He feinted an attack with his blade that was countered by a hard blow to his left knee. Alex dropped on that knee and used his blade to deflect a blow aimed for his head, then rolled hard to his right, forcing his body up. His opponent rushed him again, and Alex jumped back, grabbing the spear and pulling hard. That knocked the man off balance. Alex rushed up and in for a stab, but the warrior brought the spear up and batted Alex in the head with the handle. He was knocked back and the warrior thrust, but Alex swung down with his blade and sheared the spear in half. The warrior looked up at him confused, and Alex rushed him and drove the blade into his abdomen. Once, twice, 3 times did he stab the warrior, and then rescinded his blade and slashed the warrior across the chest. The man went down, falling to his back. Blood was splattered across Alex's shirt and face. The crowd cheered with the excitement of first blood. He had been told that the rules of the arena dictated that there could be no ganging up on enemies unless said enemies had bested his team. So Alex watched Gates and Vixer from afar as he set his knife back in its holder. Vixer had a southpaw stance and had already disarmed her opponent. She grasped the spear and made thrust after thrust, but the warrior danced around her attacks. She was growing more frustrated with each attack. Vixer threw the spear at her opponent, but it went far right. The warrior laughed, but Vixer sprinted for him and threw a left hook that landed on his chin. The warrior doubled back 2 steps and recovered, then threw a kick to her body. It caught Keely in the stomach, but she managed to keep her breathing steady. She tossed a kick of her own, but the warrior danced away from the blow. "Come on, you motherfucker," Vixer yelled. The warrior must have understood her, because he tried hammering her with a succession of kicks and punches. Vixer blocked and waited until he swung one punch too wide. She grabbed his arm, twisted, and pulled him over her shoulder, throwing him to the sand. Keely then brought an arm around the man's throat as he fought to stand. She choked him, forcing the air from his lungs for a few moments before pushing his head to the left, then jerking hard to the right. The snap was all she needed to hear. It was louder than the roaring of the crowd, and all she could focus on. She held onto his throat with her forearm for a few moments as she looked out into the crowd of bloodthirsty warriors cheering her on. The adrenaline that had flowed through her during the fight was wearing thin. She felt disgusted that she had killed for a crowd, but reminded herself it was necessary. Vixer dropped the body and spat on the sand before she made her way over to Alex. Gates was fending off each spear strike with his bow, fencing attacks away. The warrior was screaming at him, but Gates had a smile on his face like a man getting a good workout or playing with a child. Eventually, Gates grew bored and saw that Alex and Vixer had already finished their opponents. He caught the spear between his bow and string and yanked it from the warrior's hands, then tossed both weapons behind him. The warrior wore a fierce grin, but Gates kept his same smile, not responding to the taunts or roars the warrior boasted. The warrior came at him. Gates took one step back as the punch was thrown, then threw his own. The warrior's fist was too far off, but Gates landed squarely on the warrior's jaw. It brought the man down instantly. Up in the stands, Layla looked away as Gates picked up the spear and plunged it into his fallen foe's throat. She wondered how much more of this she would have to watch before Maeve Amaris was satisfied. The crowd never stopped cheering. They grew louder as Gates ripped the spear from his enemy's throat and stabbed it once more in the chest. "I hope this ends it," Layla said to Vale, who sat beside her. Then she noticed that Alex had taken a hard cut to his side and was keeping pressure on it with his hand. "Good! Good!" Amaris yelled. "Your next competition will begin tomorrow, but only one of you may enter." Alex winced and gave the Maeve another thumbs up, but saw instantly that she had noticed his wound. He watched her snap her finger twice, and the young medic that had helped Vixer earlier rushed for him. "Weird how much she looks like you, huh?" Vale asked. "Hadn't noticed," Layla replied. "Just hope she can keep him alive, because if these fights don't kill him, then I just might." Alex was taken to a private infirmary and laid out on a gurney where Ferris went to work sterilizing his wound. "You all right, Alex?" Gates asked, standing over his friend. Vixer was resting up against the doorway. "Yeah, I'll be fine. Go rest. Get some food. Gates nodded, and he and Vixer made back for their room. Alex groaned as Ferris poured something out of a bottle that smelled like grain alcohol. Jesus Christ! Alex yelled out, trying not to squirm. You want sepsis? Then man up and hold still, Ferris replied. Alex let out a small laugh that made his wound hurt worse. Her attitude reminded her of crotchety old Dell, or at least that same fire. Or maybe the fire was the vigorous rubbing of cloth pressed against the deep cut on his flank. So what's your story? Alex asked, trying to focus on anything other than white-hot searing. I'm a medic. I keep idiots like you from dying so you can keep killing each other. And I don't mind the sand. It's nice at times. This might hurt, by the way. Alex felt a needle pierce his skin, along with the suture running through it. It didn't feel good, but it was miles away from the alcohol. Great bedside manner, Doc, Alex said, wincing with each weave of the needle. I'm not a doctor, more of a bitch. You would be too if your job was a dead end. Oh, wait, Shaylee trailed. Yeah, mine's a little bit more literal than yours, though. You and everyone else I've seen. Well, you're obviously not from here. Were you a slave? No, I left New Purgatory a few years ago. I stowed away on a bird to Jerusalem and picked up medicine. But I hated the way refugees were treated there. Peace might mean no war, but there are still racists, politicians, and other assholes. And then, ugh, Christ, Alex moaned. You found out about this place. Yeah, I came here for a clean start, to do something that mattered. But the same people I patch up are dead days later. Shows what I know. Then why do it? Alex asked. Why do you fight in a place far away from home? Because I'm fighting a long war that I can't win alone, and I need help. If I don't get it, I could lose my home again. It's better than sitting on my ass and pretending problems don't exist, or wasting away doing something I hate, Alex explained. It sounds like you need the Maeve more than she needs you, Shaylee replied. What war are you fighting? If you're fighting for something other than money, you're obviously not a mercenary. You ask more questions than they do. That made Alex wonder about his attitude the past few days. He didn't enjoy murder, but he had convinced himself that it was necessary. Ferris had thought he was just another killer until he opened his mouth and had a real conversation. It was only now, taking a step back, that he realized what Layla was seeing. He was being a brute and justifying it because of the end goal. I guess you could call it a mutual need. War is part of my upbringing, and that's why I'm trying to change my home. I won't let it be the same way it was for me. Maybe Amaris sees that. That's why she wants me to fight. I think she wants the same thing for her people here, Alex explained. Ferris stopped her sewing. Alex looked up at her. For a moment she looked interested, before returning to stabbing Alex with the needle. New Purgatory, Shaylee said thoughtfully. What is home like now, anyway? We get bits and pieces of news out here, like John Morrison being dead. Better and worse, Alex groaned. We don't have to worry about being killed in the streets, but we're still getting all the basics back online. If you're worried about basics, then why do you need the Maeve's army? We've made enemies by declaring our freedom. There are other nations on the council who don't approve of our revolution. They labeled us terrorists, so we need an army to help protect us while we rebuild. If we were attacked, it would destabilize everything we fought for. So all this bloodshed and fighting in the arena? It has a cause. One day I'll be happy to put down my gun and just breathe. But until then, I have a responsibility to my home. Well, might I suggest you take it easy until your next fight? Otherwise, you might not see home again, Ferris said. Alex looked down and saw his wound was clean and dressed. Thanks. I appreciate that. I'm sure my doppelganger will too. It might keep her from killing me the next time I head to your group's room. You're what now? Alex asked. The girl who looks like me. The blonde. Oh, Layla. Right. Well, she doesn't have anything to worry about thanks to you. Alex hopped off the table and started for the exit when Ferris blocked him. Are you sure? Alex was confused. A few moments ago she was berating him, and now he thought, No, it isn't what you think. Doesn't matter anyway. Yeah, I'm sure, Alex said with some force behind his voice. You didn't answer my question. Shaylee shook her head. That's because I don't have an answer. It's hard to find purpose when everyone else who tries ends up dead. Yeah, Alex said as he brushed past her and made for the hall. I know what you mean. Ferris watched him go. She was intrigued. He was unlike anyone she had ever met before. The man was not only a revolutionary and warrior, but he was also loyal, maybe even to a fault. Ferris let her imagination take over as she went to sterilize her medical equipment. The truth was that she had come to the desert to die, and then found Maeve Maris. Proving herself as a medic was simple, and that gave her a job. For Shaylee, that was good enough, but she always longed for more. Not adventure or war. All she wanted was a chance to do something that mattered, to try and take some of the bad out of the world. That was the entire reason she studied medicine in Jerusalem. Instead, she became a tool for those who didn't share her goals. Now, though, after meeting the man who killed the tyrant that caused her to leave home, she wondered if there was a cause left in the world worth fighting for. Amaris brought Alex and his team to her throne to preview who their next opponent would be. A few more days had passed. More would pass to give each side a chance to recover. Alex was not a fan of the waiting, especially with New Purgatory weighing heavily on his mind, but he tried to focus on the arena and what the Maeve's thoughts might be. Is this someone special to you, Amaris? Alex pointed to the tattooed man in the center of the arena. He looks different than your other warriors. Older, more weathered. Gajil is unique, Amaris replied, and a great warrior. But he has never had any ambition towards my throne or army. He could leave combat at any time, but Gajil is in the arena because he chooses to fight, and the people love him for it. Alex nodded, thinking of the potential of such a man. He had more questions, but decided to let Gajil's work in battle answer them. The warrior stood alone in the arena, no weapons, and the same ragged pants his fellow warriors had worn. Begin, Amaris yelled. The gates to the cells opened, and out came foes Alex and Layla were all too familiar with. Alex, those are... Layla started. Yeah, I know. Rovers. What the hell is a rover? Vixer asked. Drug and radiation ravaged humans. They start out as people, but something changes their bodies. They go mad and attack, killing, raping, and eating anything that isn't them. I thought they were only in London, Layla explained, her voice haunted. No, I've seen things like this out west, Gates said. There's a lake in Northern California. The old signs called it clear, but it was filled with some of the foulest shit I've ever seen. The tribal settlements seemed empty out there, until things like these started crawling out from everywhere. Where did you get 'em? Vale asked Amaris. My army finds them on scouting expeditions into Africa. They're everywhere in old world camps. As far as my scouts know, they aren't sentient, barely better than animals that roam the plains and sands. Have you ever had your medics examine them? Make sure they're safe to have around your gladiators? They could be carrying disease or viruses. You shouldn't ask questions you don't want the answer to, handsome, the Maeve replied. Alex tried to ignore that comment, and instead watched Gajil. The old warrior waited for one rover to approach him, then threw a hard kick to its head, knocking it to the ground. The other two rovers screamed out in their horrifying shrieks that Layla was still fighting to forget. Gajil found it simple to breeze by them with slight movement. The creatures were fierce, but they were not intelligent. Their movements were predictable, as were their attacks. The crowd roared as Gajil sidestepped the rover's attack, then threw more kicks at them. Alex realized then that this was not a demonstration, it was purely for the entertainment of the crowd. He let out a sigh and turned his back on Amaris's arena. Not enjoying the show, Alexander? The Maeve asked. I've seen those monsters rip people apart and you have your warriors treat them like toys. You claim you want to change your people's path? Well, this sends the wrong message to both me and your people. I'd rather do something productive like bang my head against a wall or count grains of sand. Alex left without saying another word, and his team followed. Amaris found that interesting, and wondered if she had finally reached the limit of Alexander's patience. She contemplated what that might do to him in the arena as she watched Gajil snap the neck of an oncoming rover. Alex waited for the rest of his team to catch up outside the halls, and together they made back for their room. It was silent until Vale decided a decision needed to be made about the final fight. Look, Amaris said his last match will only be one fighter. I'll do it. That guy didn't look all that tough. No, Alex replied. I made the call for us to fight in the arena, so I'll be the one to see us out of it. That's bullshit, Alex. Look at your damned ribs, Vixer protested. Your body was still bruised when you fought. I'll be fine, Alex declared, motioning for the rest of them to move ahead. All of them entered except Layla, who waited in the doorway. Come on, she said. I'm not done walking yet. Alex followed her from behind. Neither of them said anything until they found themselves in the rock garden at the entrance of the Colosseum. The fanatics were still pouring out from the last show, but Alex and Layla found a secluded spot near a pool of water. What's going on with you? Layla asked bluntly. Alex sat next to her silently for a few moments. He picked at the palm of his hand and then stared off at the sand dunes that painted the horizon. Layla could see that he didn't want to have to explain himself. He saves that for his damn journals, but he's not getting off so easily this time. Damn him. He even lets me read them so I can sort it out on my own later. Why can't he just tell me what he's feeling? His plans? What is wrong? I'm just not handling things the way they need to be handled. If I'm not straightforward here, we could end up in another war instead of preventing one, Alex explained. He didn't look at Layla once, but she was burning a hole on the side of his head with her eyes. After a few moments, she stopped and scoffed. Would you stop and look at me for 1 second? I don't give a shit about this army, or the arena, or even New Purgatory right now. I'm talking about you. Since we've got on that bird, it's been nothing but murder with you. And you're using New Purgatory as an excuse. Alex shrugged his shoulders and finally turned his head to look at her. What are we doing out here, Layla? I'm trying to fix shit, but not just for us, for the people here too. This is the way I gotta do it. What more do you want from me? I want you to not become the man you learned far too much from. I don't want you to become the manipulative, bitter, old son of a bitch Jack Newsom was. I'm not sure if that was the tower or what you've been reading in those goddamn journals of his, but you're not the man I love right now. I saw a flash of you, the real you, in that room when you refused to watch those rovers get slaughtered for nothing more than bloody entertainment. I know that, Alex, but I feel like I haven't seen him in weeks. Alex didn't know what to say. He knew what she was talking about. He had felt it when he had his conversation with Shaylee. The old man had played a part in the path he was walking, but he wasn't here to take blame. The decisions were Alex's, but he felt he'd never had to do anything to sacrifice his friends, even if it meant putting all this to an end. I am not Jack Newsom, Alex replied as he reached out for one of Layla's hands, which she recessed quickly. She stood up and looked down at him. No, Alex, you're becoming something worse. And unless you get ahead of it, you're going to lose everyone you've ever called a friend. Alex looked away from her and turned his head back for the dunes. Layla bent over and grabbed him by the chin, turning his head back towards her. And you're going to lose me, too. Layla let go of him and stormed off to the arena. Alex watched her before he felt that cold feeling of ice stabbing him in the gut and working its way up to his heart. He let his head fall into his hands and began to wonder if his emotions had finally gotten the better of him. If the loss of his friends at Morrison's Tower had made him Jack. Is this how the old man felt? Did he think accomplishing his goals would be worth it in the end, even though he paid for it with everything? His best friend, his lover, his old squad. Is that why he never planned on living to see it all along? Is that where I am? He knew without Jack, he wouldn't be where he was today. Perhaps he, Layla, and the rest would be fighting a losing battle against endless Marine patrols and get more people killed than they could ever save. That made him consider Layla's words. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe the ends did justify the means. But there always had to be someone who forced those decisions. For the Crusaders, that had been Jack Newsom. But Alex did not want to be like Jack. The old man was a cautionary tale, not someone to aspire to. But Alex was finding it increasingly difficult to know what that right thing to do was. He spat into the fountain of water beside him and decided he would sleep here tonight. That would give him all the time he needed to decide what had to be done next. Gates watched as Vale drew on the walls with some of the markers from his pack and took in the simple strokes the man made with each flick of his wrist. He wasn't sure what Vale was drawing. No, creating. But it was inspiring to watch. Vale took the large black pen and went from right to left, zigzagging lines until they touched the floor, then back up again when they touched the ceiling. Every so often he would stop, grab another color, and do the same thing on another part of the wall. Curiosity finally got the best of Sam. What is it, Tyrese? Vale stopped creating and looked back at Gates. That's how I feel about this place. Its history, bloodshed. Nothing I could say would give it the due I feel in my head. So, it's a mess then? Gates replied. Someone might look at it that way, sure, but it's an organized mess. Uniform, but the variety in its colors and the background adds to that. One simple misstep ruins the bigger picture. Gates looked again at the work Tyrese had done. Each of the colors was surprisingly similar in how they were designed, even if it looked like a bunch of scribbles on a wall. Sam didn't understand art, but he did have a good hold on body language. He could see how relaxed Tyrese was as the man worked on his creation again. He was breathing deeper, comfortably, rather than keeping his hands busy, as he often did when he was sitting around a table with the rest of the team, with nothing to do but listen. It occurred to Gates that Tyrese also seemed to be fighting a battle with every stroke. I wonder if that's how he gets that shit out of his system. Maybe the words he's afraid to say come out in his paintings. Maybe this whole place is just making him more anxious than usual. Do much drawing, Gates? Tyrese asked as he continued his broad strokes. Just with arrows. Survival doesn't afford much time for creativity. I wouldn't say that. Fighting isn't like any I've ever seen. Gates shrugged his shoulders as he reached into his bag for an old protein bar. Throwing blades and shooting arrows are skills you pick up fast when bullets go from common courtesy to currency. It's still creative in its own way. What you call survival, some might call art. Fletching arrows, tipping them with magnesium. Even if someone taught you that, you had to become resourceful with what you found. There's creativity in that. I never thought of it that way. Never really had a chance to think about it that way. Hard to think about the creative impact I'm having on the world when it's trying to kill me. Vale laughed at that. True enough. But it's moments like these where we aren't being killed that let us enjoy those ironies. Otherwise, what's the point of living? Gates took those simple words to heart. It made him wonder why he had fought so hard to survive in a world where early death was a certainty. He never had illusions of another place he could go where life didn't mean eating skewered rat over a campfire. He just lived by forcing himself to keep living. And along the way, he had developed a strong set of skills and tools that gave him purpose elsewhere. He wondered if that was the same for Tyrese, if the man's art kept him sane, or if he had developed it as a means of his own survival. Gates could have asked, but the knowledge was not his to take, or to ask for. He was interested in how things worked, not people. That was just another way he had survived out in the wastes, and another way Tyrese's point was proved again. Why do you do it? Vixer asked as Layla rested on a cot. Vixer knew she had no business asking about Layla's personal life, but she was bored and wanted to do more than lie in bed and try to ignore the constant pain in her body. Do you want the cliche answer, or do you want the truth? Layla replied. Huh, you're more interesting than I thought. I imagined they were the same. Oh, please, please go on and tell me about the stars in my eyes and my unfaltering love for a man who wants nothing more than to break my heart. Presumptuous bitch, Layla shot back. Vixer was surprised. She didn't think Layla had that strong of language in her vocabulary. But you do love him? Vixer asked. Layla let out a long sigh and fell back on her cot. Yeah, but I would still be here even if I didn't. What we're doing is important, even if it means we're all going to get killed. But you're not supportive of the choices he makes. Do you think that's because you care about him? If you didn't, would it be easier to accept the sins he wears on his arms and hands? What the fuck are you going on about, Keeley? Layla asked as she sat up and glared at the captain. Vixer gave Layla a grin. You had your little war, but neither of you know about command. I do, Layla. I know how it changes a person when they get to decide who lives and who dies. That's why soldiers go home and their families don't recognize them. They can't understand what they've had to witness, and the soldier could never make them understand, nor would he want to. I've been with him every step of the way. I see it in his face. I see what he struggles with. His struggles are my struggles because we both face the same thing. Sure, you see it, but you don't understand it. He cushions you so you don't have to, just like Jack Newsom did with him. That's what a leader does, even if his people hate him for it, just like you hate him for it right now. Layla felt like they were sparring, and Vixer had thrown a hook that sent her to the ground. She knew Vixer was probably right, even if Layla didn't want to believe it. The old man had been the example, and Alex was not afraid to lace up the boots Jack had left behind. Does it weaken him to have me around? Because I question him? Because I want him to be a better man than Jack Newsom was? Layla asked, fighting the growing feeling of sourness that crept up in her throat. I can't answer that, Layla. Only Alex can. But I can tell you this. The kind of leader he is depends on how he takes what you give him. You're the most important person in his life. Of anyone, he'll listen to you. So what will he do with that? Will he continue down the path of Jack, ignoring your advice and continuing to do the thing you find terrible if it means accomplishing his goals? Or will he pull back, maybe not make the hard choices? And will that be better or cause more damage? I don't have the answers, Layla. I can only go by what I've seen. Vixer let out a long sigh. My troops are my only example. The ones who used to lead Morrison fire teams, the leaders. They're the ones that remind me of Alex. Some need support, some need bloodshed. And others... Vixer stopped herself. What? Layla asked. Some don't need any of that. Those are the ones that walk the line between life and death, sanity and insanity. They're the cowboys and cowgirls. They think they have so much to prove, and it ends up eating them alive, be it on the battlefield or alone after one too many drinks and nothing but a sidearm on their nightstand. Layla shook her head and tried to erase that last image from her mind. She fell back on her cot and rolled towards the wall. Vixer felt light wetness around her eyes, the same Layla felt too. I'm sorry I asked, Layla said. I'm sorry I told you. When Alex finally woke up, he was patting sand off his body and clothing. He wanted a shower, but didn't want to see his team again until he had won this last fight or died. He made for Amaris's throne, where she waited with the medic, Shaylee Ferris. Alex wondered if the Maeve used her as a source of gossip amongst the troops and warriors, or if they were just briefing each other on the day's events. Dear God, you look awful, Shaylee said as she reached for a cloth in her pocket. Leave him alone, Shaylee. Your actions are transparent. The man is spoken for, and I won't have my medic thrown in the arena to settle a domestic feud. Amaris cut in. Very well, Shaylee replied as she made for the exit. Alex waited until Shaylee was gone before he spoke. Thanks. It's the last thing I need right now. She's a good person, Alex, but she struggles with depression. She either cares too much or not enough. You should feel fortunate that you fall into the former category. Alex had been proven wrong a lot lately. He sighed and waited for Amaris to move on. He wanted the day to be done, or to be dead. At this point, it didn't matter. He felt the beatings, both physically and verbally, bearing down on his body, on his mind, and on his morality. When do I fight this Gajil? Alex asked, trying to forward the conversation. Now, if you wish. He is already waiting in his cage. Wonderful. But you're sure you want me to kill your champion? You overestimate your chances, Alex. I'm confident in my abilities, Maeve. Weren't you? Alex could hear a sword unsheathed from behind him. When he turned around, he saw that it was Castor. How dare you? You will not speak that way about the Maeve. You have not earned the right, Castor announced. Amaris let out a long sigh. The amount of misplaced respect and loyalty made her sick. Can I kill him first? Alex asked, turning back to the Maeve. It'll be on the house, just like his blood if he doesn't put that fucking sword away. No, the Maeve replied sternly. You disappoint me, Castor. Amaris, in one solid movement, reached down by her leg and flung a blade. It caught Castor in his sword arm. He didn't yell out, but he did drop his blade. The blade the Maeve had thrown was a dull knife from her time fighting in the arena. It barely pierced Castor's skin, but the hurt on his face was the Maeve's intended effect. Leave us now. Go see Ferris if that suits you, but I will not have you here, Castor. The consort nodded. He was not eager to be taught yet another lesson so quickly, and made his way back into the arena's halls. Alex shook his head, and a maddened smile spread across his face. He laughed, but only at the incredulousness. How is it you expect your people to kill, but you don't kill anyone yourself? I've earned the right to never have to do that again, the Maeve replied. Alex mocked. Because you rule here? What an interesting leader you are, letting others kill for you on one hand, but complaining they'll not find a different path in the other. War, killing, fighting. It makes hypocrites out of us all. Alex left her, making for his cage. I hope that worked. He hoped the fighting would start before his team was able to watch. He didn't need them seeing what was about to happen. Gagio looked across the arena at his opponent, the man that Maeve Amaris had identified as Alexander. Gagio had watched his fights and had a solid grasp on the man's fighting style. He was a street fighter who found advantages in the strength of his enemies, and then turned that against them. Still, he was unsure at the ease of the fight. For so long the Maeve had thrown him weaker and weaker warriors and prisoners. He wondered if this man might prove a challenge. If he wasn't, then all this anticipation would be for nothing, and the crowd would be displeased. Gagio yearned to see his own blood in his eyes again, to feel the breaking of a bone or a scream from his own mouth at pain. He had forgotten what that was like, and he needed to remember. The two men met at the center of the arena. For the first time in many fights, a warrior reached his arm out as a sign of respect. Gagio matched Alex's gesture. They each took a step back. Neither carried weapons. This would be a test of simple hand-to-hand combat. Alex struck first, throwing a fist that missed Gagio, who sidestepped it and returned a punch at Alexander's side. Alex reached for his ribs with one hand, and the two circled. The hit had caught the younger man off guard. Gagio waited until Alex lifted his hands once again. The old warrior threw a kick, and Alex took it to the knee but managed to stay up. He countered the kick with two hard lefts to Gagio's head. The first landed, but the second deflected downward. The warrior grabbed Alex by his wrist, turned and pulled hard, tossing the younger man over his shoulder. Alex hit the sand and opened his eyes to see a boot coming down on his head. Alex rolled. Gagio shouted out as his heel met the ground instead of skull. Alex forced himself up and charged the warrior, and grapebining into Gagio's legs while grabbing them from behind the knee. Alex tripped Gagio's right leg and brought him to the ground. Gagio tried to fight him off with his elbows, but Alex was already hammering fists down on the older warrior's head. The warrior lifted his arms to try and block Alex's attacks. He waited for the short span in between punches, then forced an elbow into Alex's chin, which caught the man off balance. The warrior used the force in his body to push the man off him, and then stood back up. Alex stumbled back to his feet. He felt lightheaded, dazed, and for a moment he looked in the stands while he circled with Gagio. Alex saw Layla, Gates, Vixer, and Vale all watching him from near where Amaris sat. He hoped they wouldn't have to watch him die, for he had no faith that he would walk away from a battle with the man who had never lost a fight. But neither have I. Alex brought up his fists again, and Gagio did the same. They were both bleeding. The cuts on Alex's cheek and chin were seeping blood. The same was true of Gagio's forehead. The old warrior struck first, throwing a roundhouse kick. Alex ducked and punched hard into Gagio's abdomen. It doubled Gagio over. He dropped an elbow on the back of Gagio's head, and the old warrior hit the ground. Alex knew he wasn't out. He could see sand kicking up from each deep breath Gagio took, but the warrior was not moving much. With one hand, Gagio reached out to Alex's boot and tapped his hand on it. Alex was in disbelief. Had Gagio let him win? The crowd was exploding with excitement, cheering and chanting his name. Alex held up one fist. The blood was dripping back down to his head. The crowd cheered even louder. You know what you must do, Amaris yelled. Her voice cut through the crowd like a knife sailing in the wind. Alex looked up at her and at the faces of his team. They seemed to be in solidarity, even Layla. None of them turned away. Amaris, now standing from her throne, reached at her side and threw Alex's blade into the center of the arena. The blade landed at his feet. Alex leaned down and picked it up, then stared at it for a few moments. He looked back at Amaris and placed the blade in its sheath. Alex bent back down and lifted Gagio up under his arms. Why? The old warrior asked with heavy breaths. What is the meaning of this, Alexander? You must kill him, Amaris screamed. Alex stared at the Maeve for a few moments, taking the time to stabilize his breathing, to make sure Gagio was comfortably rested on one of his shoulders. He then looked at his team. at Layla, who, even at this distance, appeared to have welling eyes. I've been reminded recently of why I fight and put my life on the line, Amaris, Alex started. It's not for your entertainment. I bested your greatest warrior, yet you would throw him away like an old piece of meat. If you want him dead, then come down and kill him yourself, because I won't take credit for murdering all he stands for to your people. The chanting and cheering from the crowd stopped. Amaris could feel hundreds of sets of eyes fall on her at the same time. She had failed herself and her people again. She was being educated by a foreigner. You want your people to strive for more, but you continue this cycle of bloodshed and violence instead of learning to build and grow, Alex continued. That is not the world I believe in. It's the one I fought to end. Your people could be so much more, but in continuing this cycle, you've only held them back. Once Gajil was able to stand under his own power again, Alex let him go. If killing him is what it takes to have your armies, I say damn you and damn them. If you believe that this is the only way forward, then you don't deserve to rejoin the world. With that, Alex moved away from the center of the ring, making back for his cage, and Gajil, for the first time, was left alone with no cheers and no praise, just the maddening silence of hundreds of spectators, wondering what would come next. Alex returned to the room with his team, already there and waiting for him. They were all smiles from what he had done. They congratulated him. For the first time since his original team, Alex felt he had done the world a measure of good, even if it didn't aid him directly. That, he knew, was the difference between himself and Jack Newsom. I can't believe you did that, Layla said as she brought a wet cloth up to Alex's cheek. That is the man who saved my life. That's the man who will win our fight, regardless of who will join us, Alex replied. Jan won't be happy about you not giving reinforcements, Vale warned. Then we'll just have to get them elsewhere. This was a gamble, and I let my expectation become a reality that wasn't true. I wouldn't say that. It was Gagio, standing in the doorway, his wounds clean and his body clothed in old leather armor Alex had never seen before. His accent, I can't place it. Then Alex noticed that Shaylee Ferris was behind Gagio, trying to hide from the gaze of everyone else in the room. Why are you here? Alex asked. We are here to join you, Gagio replied. I have no future here. You took that from me. But I have a feeling you are destined for something greater. You don't know anything about me, Alex replied. We fought. You can learn much about someone by how they fight, their movements, their strikes, or how aggressive they are. I know you didn't plan to win that fight, and that you surprised yourself. I also know you think I let you win. Alex's face went red. He didn't want the air taken out of him so early after being victorious. Well, did you? Look at me, Alexander. I am far older than you. I haven't known war in a long time. My battles are against children. There is no practice in sparring with them or executing them. And you want to go back to a life of war? Layla asked. It is what I am for. What about you? Alex asked towards Ferris. She moved out from her hiding spot behind Gajil. You don't have a medic, and you're fighting for my home. I like to have a purpose in my life. This place has none, Shaylee explained. Alex looked around at his team. They all seemed fine with the new recruits. Get your things and meet us here. I need to talk to your Maeve and find our bird, Alex said. No need, Amaris pushed past both Ferris and Gajil. She looked disgusted by their presence. Your bird is outside my arena. Take it. Take these people and leave. Alex looked at her for a few moments. He wondered if she would just kill him at once, but she stayed still and matched his stare. Alex motioned for his team to head for the bird, but he stayed behind. Was there something else? Amaris asked, keeping her face regal as if it were cut from marble. Alex knew she was hiding anger, and she was doing it well. Just that I know you'll make the right choice, and you'll see the favor I did for you. Amaris smiled and snapped her fingers. Castor walked in with a rifle slung around his good arm and handed it to Alex. I believe this was yours, Amaris said as Alex checked its mag and slung it across his body. You're more like him than you think. Alex didn't return the Maeve's smile. Instead, he moved right beside her and dropped his head right near the Maeve's ear. For a small moment before he spoke, He thought he could smell her fear. She was afraid of him. No, I'm not. He walked out the doorway, making for the exit to the arena. Then, and only then, did he smile to himself. His plan had worked, and he managed to get the last word in. It was late in the day when Janet received the transmission from Alex, which meant it had to be late wherever they were now, or early. She was sipping a cup of coffee. After this, there was a training exercise she had to run through for the ex-remnant soldiers, and it was her turn to play door guard for Alonsfo's. She might have been in charge, but leadership just meant doing the groundwork while more people paid attention to you. Are you sure she's going to support us? It sounds like you pissed her off instead of getting her aid, Janet said over the radio. I don't know. Alex's voice crackled. I'm going off what she didn't say. She knew Jack. I'm hoping that loyalty will be enough. At least you picked up 2 more people, Janet replied. They're solid? The warrior is. I'm not sure about the medic. I'm told she has some issues. What, like Brandon-sized issues? Janet asked. I don't see any scarring on her body, nor have I seen her drink. She can't be all that bad then. Where are you off to next? Russia. The line went silent for a while. They both knew why Alex wanted to go to Russia. There wasn't much there other than Mikhail. Russia, Janet mirrored. Back to Mikhail's graveyard. I'm hoping that's where he went. Maybe he has contacts with the Russian government. They don't have an army anymore, Alex. What good does having the Russians with us do? They're another council vote we need. Council in Jerusalem is the only way to clear our names and to get New Purgatory back in the field. It's also the best way to fight Baruger without force. He thinks he has a monopoly on power. We'll cut that off. Shit, Alex, we're just soldiers. We don't know the first thing about politics. That's Baruger's realm. Yeah, and that's why we're going to find someone who does. Don't worry. I've got an idea of who already. Just keep me in the loop, okay? It's killing me not being out there with you guys. Janet listened to Alex sigh through the radio. I know. I could have used you out here. I feel like I'm losing myself without Elias or the old man. No one to lean on or straighten me out. I know the feeling, but you have Layla. Blondie will keep you level-headed. For now, just get done and get home. Then you can lean on me all you want. Hell, I'm used to having the whole damn city lean on me. Thanks, Janet. We'll get through this. All of us. Eli would have wanted that. Janet could almost feel the levity in Alex's voice. You're handling all that okay, right? Being in the air again must bring the memories back. It'd be nice if he was still around. If anything, I need his example front and center. He'd be grounded right now, even with all the shit flying around. Alex answered. Janet didn't reply for a few moments. Alex found a way to move past his fallen friend's death, but it was still in the forefront of her mind. A day didn't pass where she didn't look down at the second dog tag dangling around her neck. Alex, something came up. Have a safe trip to Russia. Yeah, we'll do our best. Stay safe. The radio crackled and then died. Janet needed to escape that conversation. It was all too much now, especially with what waited on the horizon. Janet opened her desk and reached for a pack of smokes and lighter that lay there. She had given up on Ghana cigarettes because the euphoria that came when she lit one up had given up on her. She needed a clear head now. Regular tobacco cigarettes were the only way for her to do that. Janet found herself on New Purgatory's dirty streets as she lit a match off her boot. The neon lights were shining down on everything and everyone with enough courage to brave the midweek night for a drink, a dance, and the promise of freedom. If only for a night. She breathed in the smoke and let it exhale out her nose. The lights and the promise were gaudy lies and makeup for the real city. The city that chewed its people to pulp and left them bleeding out on the street. Life needed its distractions, but for Janet, distractions were just that. She saw the bigger picture now, and because of that, she knew her time had to be devoted to forwarding the goals of the city, not her own foolish desires for entertainment or fun. To her, those days were long over. Is this what getting older is like? Fuck, Dad, why did you leave me this legacy? Why build up my life to become a leader instead of giving me a regular life? I don't know if I have the fucking drive to do this. Janet knew there was no turning back from this now. Her life was about building a new city, a new world, a world that could stand up to the old one, but by learning from the mistakes of the past instead of building over them. She had to have a hand in that, and that made her sad inside. Janet had to do what the old man had done, sacrifice now for a future that she and her friends might never see. I can live with that. I've got to. As she flicked her cig in the air towards a back alley, she wondered if her friends could do the same. For the first time, Alex was piloting a hellchopper without help from the automatic flight controls. Layla watched close from over his shoulder, but there was little she had to help him with. You're a natural at this, Alex. Your dad taught you more than you thought. I guess you're right. I won't be flying in combat drills anytime soon, but at least I can hold her steady in one direction. That's more than most people learn. Check the dials. What's the estimated time to Severnaya base? Alex looked over and counted out the time in his head. He wasn't great with numbers, which was a good reason not to be flying in the first place. 6 or 7 hours, I think. Enough time for everyone to get some sleep. I guess so, Layla replied as she reached under Alex's arms and tried heaving him from his seat. Including you. I know where you last slept before that fight with Gaju. Get some real rest. You'll need it in case Mikhail doesn't recognize us. I'll be sure to show him this knife first, then, Alex said, taking a seat behind Layla. Wake me up if you want a break. Yeah, will do, Flyboy. Alex smiled. He wanted their relationship to get back to normal, fast. To do that, he had to be sure he had a grip on what he was doing. It shamed him, how much he had acted like Jack, in the ways that were both visible, the executions, and in the ways that weren't, and the lies and manipulations of the Maeve and my team. The anger that washed over him every time he had been ambushed as a teenager in New Purgatory was hard for him to reconcile as he grew older. So much so that any act of aggression towards him or his friends felt like a personal attack. It dug at him to the point that not killing any aggressor felt disrespectful towards himself and his allies. That's the side Jack couldn't or didn't want to control. He could have every detail planned and put into place, but he wouldn't pass up the chance to kill Morrison's soldiers. Who could blame a man that had lost so many friends of those same people? Still, Alex knew there were ways to wage war and ways to become a war criminal. He didn't want to believe he was a murderer, even if he had killed hundreds, no, thousands of people with his one short life. He let out a long sigh and leaned over Layla's shoulder to check the radar again. In a few hours, he would be back with one of his few friends that were still alive. Friends. They are becoming more of a rarity than cigarettes these days. Mikhail would have a refreshing and personal take on all that had happened, and Alex would use that perspective to help him put his own mind at ease. Before that, though, he would try not to make any more decisions based on his hatred for the enemy. Shaylee Ferris rarely found herself in packed spaces with people she did not know. But even if she was, the people were normally dead or incapacitated. Here, trapped in this flying tin can, everyone was alive and social. She looked at each person's face before she unpacked a few items from her bag. The one named Vale was busy drawing something with his blade on the metal hull of the bird. Gates, who looked like he hadn't slept in months, was sipping from a bottle of water, and Vixer was speaking with Gajil. This was a new world to Ferris, one she wanted, but one she knew she would struggle to understand. Teamwork was a foreign term, and friendship wasn't a part of her vocabulary. She fixed people and they lived, or they died right there on the table. What was the point of remembering names or faces or birthdays or... Hey, Shaylee, Gates called out, pulling her from the rant in her head. You all right? You look kind of sick. Yes, Shaylee replied. I haven't flown in a while. Gates reached into his own bag and pulled out a bottle of water, then stood up and walked over to her. Here, this'll help. I'm no doctor, but water always keeps whatever wants to come up, down, Gates said as he handed her the bottle. Farah shook her head as she grabbed the bottle from Gates' hands. They were coarse and dirty, scarred and calloused. Well, you're a regular medical handbook, aren't you? Thanks. She took a long drink. She had been so nervous around these people she hadn't realized how thirsty she was. You're welcome. How'd Alex rope you in? Shaylee let a smile spread across her face. She thought Alex was one of the more handsome men she had stitched up, but he hadn't reciprocated to her looks or banter. She couldn't lie that she found herself drawn to him, his words, his resolve. Truthfully? Wouldn't have asked if I didn't want to know. He's smart. Smarter than most of the mercs and soldiers I've met. He uses his brain. He has goals. For some reason, I believe he'll reach. That's alluring. Attractive, even. More than that, I'm drawn to him when he speaks. What he said in the arena, how he pulled everyone's attention, even the Maves. It was intoxicating. Damn, got away with words there. I don't get to use them often. I spend most of my time away from other people. What about you? Why are you here? Alex and Layla saved my life. Figured I owed it to help them. I get to see parts of the world I thought were long dead. Humans seem to have a way of surviving, though. We're stubborn like that. You look like you know that too well, Shaylee said as she reached up to check his lymph nodes and heartbeat. Gates didn't have enough time to pull back. He hung his head and resigned himself to Shaylee. When she was done, she brought her hands down and looked at him sideways. How long have you known? She asked. There's no way you could know that just by. I'm good at what I do. She cut him off, but trailed. She realized then she didn't know his name yet. Sam. Sam Gates, he replied. How long? Shaylee repeated. Gates leaned back on the chair. He felt cramped in this bird. There was barely any room between the rows of seating that faced each other. He was even less comfortable having to talk about his health with everyone in earshot. 4 years ago, Gates whispered, I was working with some other refugees out on an old farm combine. We managed to get it working again, but that was before we were ambushed by a local group of raiders. Managed to fight him off, but I was sure I'd been shot. Once the battle was over, I remember standing out in the field and falling over. I couldn't breathe, and then I passed out. If you never recognized it as a child, that means... I damn well know what it means. I don't think about it. I don't want to know how much time I have left. Better if no one else knows too, huh? I understand, but you know it might be possible to fix it. I appreciate the thought, Doc, but I don't want to die on a slab. I try to take care of myself, probably the only reason I've managed along this far. I won't go out for a chance I don't believe in. Shaylee thought that over as she took in Gates's features. Does it make you happy? Knowing, I mean? She asked. Gates returned the smile that had faded from Shaylee's face. It makes me feel free. I don't have to worry about petty things because I don't have time to. Gives me inspiration to survive in other ways. If I don't have a lot of time, I'm sure as hell not letting a stray bullet kill me. I get it, Shaylee replied. She couldn't understand why he was smiling. She had a somber expression on her face. Hey, don't worry about me, Doc. You can't save 'em all, right? It's not that. You just don't sound like any dying man I've ever met. Most fear what's next. I've always wanted to know, but... She turned over her arm. There were long stretches of cuts that ran from her wrist down to her elbow. Christ. I'm guessing those aren't from the arena, are they? Gates asked. No, I did them. Finding my place in this world has taken a lot of exploration. Not all of it good. That's why it hurts me when I see a man who shouldn't be dying when he's found his meaning in life. I can't see mine even if it's right in front of me, and I keep trying to throw it away. Stop thinking about it so hard, Gates replied. My life has been survival. Just trying to make it to tomorrow has fueled me. Goals just got picked up along the way. You make it sound easy. If you let it, then it is. That and running and fighting for your life as a way of pushing your focus away from philosophy and moving it towards your next gasp of air, or making sure your legs don't fail under you. Ferris finally smiled again. I like you, Sam. You're clever. Gates let out a short chuckle. Well, at least you didn't call me old. Vixer found Gajil to be more interesting than whenever Gates was regaling Ferris. For the last hour, the two warriors from diverse backgrounds discussed close-quarters combat and weapons frequently used in Egypt's arena. Every explanation the man had made Vixer even more curious. Where were you trained? She asked. Trained. I was born into Battle-Keely, in a place that is no longer on any maps. It was called Sudan, but that name and those borders mean nothing to the tribes that inhabit that place. But you had to have been born before the war. Gajil smiled, but it was more sinister than comforting. What makes you believe that my home was any different before the war than it has been after? Vixer shook her head. Gagio was well spoken, comfortable even with English, though a slight accent remained. She guessed that the Maeve must have found a way to teach English to her warriors. I shouldn't have assumed. Gagil opened his hands, spread his arms, and simply shrugged. The rest of the world did what it could, but our people have always been brushed aside. Our land is too harsh, and our people harsher. Is why they were taken, no doubt like his ancestors. Gagil pointed to Tyrese. This conversation was making Vixer uncomfortable. Not more than a few months ago, she was still taking slaves for John Morrison. Even if the difference was the color of the slave's skin, it mattered little to the slaves themselves. That might be a history best left aside, Vixer suggested. I am sure your people would like to put that part of history aside, Gagil replied. Point taken, Vixer said curtly. So if you were raised in Sudan, how did you get to hold Cairo? Gagil gave Vixer that same eerie smile again. The Maeve is a greater warrior than her throne and shiny armor suggest. Years ago, when I was still a slave, she killed her way through the arena. It encouraged me to drop my mining pick and grab the closest weapon. But before I could start, Amaris had ascended and killed the old Maeve. She abolished the forced fights and slavery, but kept the arena. But you decided to fight anyway, even though you didn't have to? That is an interesting way of putting it, Keeley, but not accurate. Not for me. Though slavery was abolished, my job stayed the same. I would have continued to toil in the mines. So the truth is, I had no choice. My childhood in Sudan taught me one skill, a skill I became good at. Taking lives. I would rather fight in the sun, with the sand stinging my feet, than hauling rock from a dark cave. Keeley studied Gagil as he talked. He was old, probably nearing his 50s, but the youth in his movements and attacks in the battle with Alex never betrayed that age. The premature wrinkles and dark splotches on his neck and face did that. Well, your lack of scars tells me you must have been successful. What does the title of champion of the arena get you? Food, better shelter, women, and any honor one could want from battle, though some fights were more rewarding than others. And the throne? I have no ambition for power or leadership. Maeve Amaris had my respect for what she accomplished and continues to try to accomplish. Killing her would kill what old Cairo is trying to become. A real city. A city that survived the war. A city that bested those foolish leaders that saw nothing more than a camp for them to warlord over. That is a wise amount of foresight for a pit fighter, Vixer joked. There is a reason I was better than most of the others, Vixer. Battle requires more than strength. An ox may pull a cart, but someone must design and build the harness. Clearly. What about you, Keeley? The others call you Captain. Is that a title you earned with them? The light expression on Vixer's face disappeared. She turned away from Gagil. She looked at the closed ramp of the Hell Chopper. That same uncomfortable feeling came creeping back to her. She wanted to fight it. Keeley was proud of her service to the military, but she was by extension a part of the atrocities committed by John Morrison and her fellow Marines. The more stories she heard from Alex and Layla about growing up in Morrison's new purgatory made her stomach knot and regret her history. No, I earned my title fighting against them, but we lost. They could have hunted me down and executed me in the army I served with, but they didn't. My Marines and I switched sides to save ourselves. We want to be part of a new future they are building. The more I'm around Alex and Layla, I see their character and hear their stories. It makes me believe that I was once on the wrong side. But I needed to survive. I understand. That is what sets you apart from everyone else here. They have an aversion to you. It is not difficult to see, Gagil explained. Vixer let out a sigh. And here I thought you'd find me repulsive. Every time I repeat that story, people seem to find distance away from me. They are afraid of what they can't understand, Keeley. You had your reasons, just as they had theirs. When my people fought and absorbed other tribes, it was not always easy finding common ground. These people you fought against, you traded lives for lives, and now you must eat shoulder to shoulder with. That is not easy. How did the new tribes integrate then? Keeley asked. In the end, people are just people. Eventually routine sets in, and life finds balance. Beliefs are shared, ideas change. I came to find what my own people wanted slowly changed as new blood was added. That made us stronger and remained true even after we were absorbed by Cairo. Dissenters were murdered, but many others found their place. Those were the ones that made changes. To change is to survive, even if it means abandoning some of the past. I'll have to keep that in mind in case I try to raise a rifle against Alex, Vixer said. Gagio looked at the captain with curious, squinted eyes. It's a joke, Gagio. You should keep your focus on killing people, Gagio replied, a less grim smirk on his face. Keely shook her head as her own smile returned.